You live in a third world country where efficiency is pulled down to the bottom of the barrel by everyone's main antagonist, survival. And so certain things like time-use public transport, things like good customer service, fast internet, Apple Pay, things like YouTube ad revenue, electric cars, coffee shops, etc. Such things can only be seen as luxuries. And such luxuries are reserved only for those with exposure to such amenities, usually fellow third worlders who spent a month or two abroad and came back with an altered palate for living.
And then I said, polo isn't a sport, it's a lifestyle.
Or those who, although born in the third world, grew up so insulated from the harsh realities on the ground that their households might as well have been little embassies belonging to whatever first world country their parents were accustomed to or trying to emulate. And so when you decide to start voluntarily doing certain things that are inconvenient, when you decide to start taking cold showers, to habitually avoiding elevators, when you decide to use a cheap soap brand, you know, that green bar soap that is a staple in every household in the third world, when you decide to cook once a week, throw everything in the fridge and retrieve it daily to eat unfresh, when you decide to never buying an automatic car because it deteriorates your driving skills, when you decide to exercising even when it is cold and rainy.
It's not about the rain. It's what the rain represents.
Mainly for health and discipline reasons. When you decide to start building a reading habit, a writing habit, etc. When you start deciding to doing all these things, you slowly come to realize something that was not as obvious, that seeking discomfort makes one more resistant to discomfort. And so when you see a man be late for an important appointment because they had to wait for the geyser to warm up before they took their hot shower, when you observe people barking profanities at a waitress for getting one item on their order wrong, when you watch a man be useless in an emergency situation that requires a manual driver, when you see men losing their breath after just one flight of stairs, when you are in the company of educated people who cannot associate their lack of insight and conversational skills to a lack of reading and writing, when you witness all these things, then you start seeing, it becomes clear to you that this is what happens when one builds a habit of always choosing comfort. It is a habit that starts off small, but slowly seeps into every nook and cranny and slowly bites away at everything that requires effort. Not seeking discomfort is corrosive and leads to terrible things in society. Anyone who has consistently watched movies over the past few years will have noticed a significant decline in the depth and originality of storylines, a drive toward maximizing box office numbers, a blatant shift toward political correctness, and an omnipresent initiative toward diversity and inclusion that can sometimes seem and feel misplaced.
So respect to the Mexican community. With that being said, I did not take my children to see Black Panther 2 so they can watch Mexican superheroes whip the shit out of black superheroes. I'm going to say it again. And I don't care who don't like it.
Now, where one would normally retreat to the nearest sofa, where a blanket, a mug of hot tea, and the periodic rustling of a page lay waiting to provide solace and an escape into a world of bravery, depth, and originality, one soon finds that the publishing industry and its authors have not remained the heroes one had expected them to be. Of the four broad media categories, including video, audio, image, and document, one would expect that the least consumed medium would remain the most unaffected. Now, it wasn't until I wanted to learn about mind maps that a friend of mine suggested a book on the topic. Halfway through, I realized it was little more than a sales pitch for the author's website, other books, business ventures, everything except how to make mind maps. A few days later, I found myself in a productivity slump and sought to fix it the best way I knew how, by reading a book on the topic. A quarter of the way through the book, I realized that as much as I respected the author and their discipline, the information they were giving sounded less like Marcus Aurelius in Meditations and more like, I need to expand on this discipline topic because that's what the publisher wants. I chose mental health instead and put those books down. It was then that I realized I had never had this experience with older books, books written before the era of internet productivity gurus, books written before my birth. Perhaps the bar is too high. One has to be careful when comparing the likes of Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, and Jung to contemporary authors who are simply trying to make a living. Not everyone can be Marcus Aurelius or Seneca. Those were different times. Nonetheless, one cannot help but be curious about why books today seem to be deteriorating in quality and depth. Could it be our society's overgrown sensitivity to anything that does not sound universally uplifting, broadly applicable, caring, or fair? If saying something that is not considered politically correct is tantamount to raising your head above the herd, is it surprising that all heads remain bowed, their eyes and mouths fixated on the ground, ensuring proximity to the food? When the definition of hate speech is stated in such non-committal terms so as to include every possible misinterpretation of both statement and intent, would it not be rational to fall in line and avoid cancellation? Is this why some books read like watered-down versions of the author's younger self? Or could this lack of depth, this platitude-laden industry of commercialized, unearned wisdom, be due to excessive consumerism? The promise of success through lucrative book deals, licensing, media exposure, and social media popularity. When an author's books are adapted into multi-million-dollar franchise movies and series, when the literary worlds they create become ingrained in cultural consciousness, is it really wrong to write with an international audience in mind? To write for the largest demographic possible? To appeal to the largest demographic possible? Is it wrong to write for success, for fame and fortune, rather than for clarity, for exploring solutions to one's dilemmas and self-confliction? Maybe one only needs to consider today's cost of living to understand why people need to make a few bucks. Selling books is not a charity, after all. Authors are confronted by bills as well. It is easy to be a purist as a consumer when your next meal is not dependent on the number of books you have sold or read. Whatever the primary cause of today's shallow content, the impact of what the reader demands from their author is paramount. Top-down approaches rarely work efficiently unless enforced without the willing participation of the consumer. Drake did not become the world's highest-selling hip-hop artist solely through record labels working his records, artificially augmenting his numbers, and proliferating his songs across digital streaming platforms. Such a strategy succeeds only when consumers themselves turn to digital streaming platforms for their music options, when they become lazy, passive, and stop actively searching for music that speaks to them. Similarly, when readers want to read only those books sanctioned by populism, then those books become the staple, reducing their choices from an a la carte selection to a fixed menu. Purists of any genre are often the hardest to please, mainly because they have standards. A worthy audience requires a worthy author, and vice versa. A worthy reader is one whose eyes are limited only to that which is beautiful and authentic, and legally blind to its level of populism. They are also the most appreciative of great works, and few things are more gratifying to a worthy author than a worthy reader who has seen the forest for the trees in their writing. Maybe we should all be purists. If "Are You Holding Back" is to be the guiding rule of thumb for authors to write deeply and honestly, then maybe "Are You Seeking Discomfort" should be the guiding rule for readers wanting to read the authentic and profound. For profound works are synonymous with discomfort. Maybe being a reader is more than just skimming through books. It is about being your author's challenge and challenger. Maybe older writers understood this all too well. This is why you should read older books, better yet, dangerous books. Without purists, authors might cease seeing their readers as intellectual equals and might resort to feeding them what has been the staple for the past few years: mindless entertainment. Bloggers' musings, adding value, one essay at a time.